Welcome to Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and today welcoming a new guest, and that is Tyler. Tyler, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Doing pretty good. So before we jump into today's movie, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Well, there's not a whole lot to tell about me. I work a normal 9 to 5 job. I work at Lowe's. I pay all my bills. It's a fairly standard life. But in my sort of off time, I enjoy watching cheesy exploitation cinema. That's kind of why I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually my love of cheesy Asian exploitation cinema specifically. That's why I'm currently writing a book, which is very daunting but kind of fun. If you don't mind, I'd like to just briefly talk about my book a little
Absolutely. That was actually what I was going to ask you, so go right ahead.
I'm currently in the middle of sort of a rough draft for my first book. So weird to say. It's called. I've got two working titles. One is The Unhinged World of Obscure Asian Cinema, and the other is The Unhinged World of Asian Exploitation Cinema. And what it's going to be about? It's going to be about how these sort of grindhouse features, these low budget entertainment. Actually have a lot to do with the social and political climate and the rich history of Asian countries. Mainly I talk about Taiwan, Thailand, China, Japan, wide spectrum of countries. I really have no set release date for it now. Like I said, it's a rough draft. I'm really looking forward to hopefully coming up with that sometime in maybe the next couple of years, hopefully.
Okay, cool. Do you have a publisher lined up for it, or are you publishing it yourself?
I don't have a publisher lined up for it, but I do have a friend of mine who knows a publisher, so I'm going to get with him when I have more of the book put together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. What are some of the Japanese films? Because that's the focus of this podcast. What are some of the Japanese films that you've got lined up to discuss in it?
Oh, good God. So many. I'm one of the things I'm talking about, I'm actually dedicating an entire chapter to the splatter punk flicks, the of the 21st century. Stuff like Tokyo Gore Police and Machine Girl and all that. I'm also talking about there's random films I have on there. I'm looking at my shelf, which is like a good 15 feet away from me, and I don't have the best eyesight. I've got like it's the I'm blanking on the title, but it's like The Living Dead in Tokyo Bay. That's the subtitle for it. That's actually a really good. I don't know if you've seen that one.
No, I've never even heard of that one.
Living Dead in Tokyo Bay. That's actually a really, really solid flick. Let me get you the full title for that so you can look it up later.
Okay.
Battle Girl, The Living Dead in Tokyo Bay from 1991.
Okay. No, I'd never heard of that one. But we just did an episode on a crossover episode, so to speak, with Artie Dan on Machine Girl. So that's up on his YouTube channel, and it should be out on the podcast feed soon as well.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah. I still have to get around to that when I own it. Yeah, that's gonna be good. I saw that one of your episodes, one of your earliest episodes, was on Bloody Chainsaw Girl.
Yeah. That was a while ago. That was kind of a disappointment, to be honest. It felt like it wasn't going as far as the concept enabled it to go.
I absolutely loved that movie. I thought the movie was great, but okay. I'm very easy to entertain. As long as you have, as long as you meet a certain quota. For me, I'm just like, whatever, 4.5 stars. Why not?
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about how you got into Asian cinema in general. What was kind of your gateway into this world?
That's going back a bit. It's kind of funny. My history with Asian cinema and Japanese cinema, it's probably started where anybody my age started with anime. I watched Toonami a lot, stuff like Full Metal Alchemist and Gundam and Dragon Ball Z, and I also rented anime from Blockbuster back when that was a thing.
Yeah.
I also watched Godzilla movies on TV. it's sort of funny. Like I never realized I was a lover of Asian films until I got much older, and I realized, wow, I've watched a lot of Japanese and Chinese movies, specifically, like, obviously the great Hong Kong action flicks with Bruce Lee and
Right.
Jackie Chan. I watched those as a kid, and it's kind of funny that sort of that realization that, wow, yeah, I have seen a lot of crazy Asian exploitation flicks over the years. That's what made me want to make the book. That sort of that realization. But yeah, it started off with the standard Godzilla anime and the Bruce Lee Jackie Chan flicks, and then it sort of has morphed more into my as an adult, my love of Kurosawa, the Kurosawa flicks, and digging deeper into the like obscurities, the depths, and finding stuff like Star Virgin. I actually sent you about Star Virgin.
Right. Yeah. We spoke about that in email.
Yeah.
What was the first like exploitation type movie that you remember getting into?
Oh my God, that's going back a bit. I honestly can't even remember. I've seen over 3,000 movies.
Okay, yeah.
In my life, and most of those are trash cinema. So like, I honestly could not tell you. I couldn't even tell you what I watched yesterday. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're going to talk today about Kibakichi, Japanese title Bako Yokaiden Kibakichi, which is a 2003-2004 film. Which is kind of loosely based on a manga, apparently, although apparently they just took the title and the basic concept and just made their own story about it. Now, I'd first seen this. You'd mentioned Blockbuster. That's actually where I first found this. It was so for anyone who is too young to remember, back in the days we had before we had Netflix and iTunes and all that, we had rental stores, and Blockbuster was the big chain. And one of the things they did, especially towards the in their later years, was they would sell their DVDs for like really cheap prices. And a lot of my collection was built up on that. And one day, looking through their DVDs, they had this Japanese movie called Kibakichi with this samurai with the kind of like straw hat on the cover, and had like kind of like this wolf image in the background, and it looked pretty interesting. And it was like, I don't know, like $3 or something. So I bought it sight unseen, and that was my introduction to that movie. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you said that you hadn't seen the movie before you agreed to come on the show, right?
That is correct. Yeah, I hadn't even heard of it until you gave me a list of movies that you had wanted to talk about in the show, and I thought, obscure samurai werewolf movie, that has potential. Yeah, I found it for like $9 on Amazon, and I was like, oh yeah, no, that's easy.
Okay, so what did you think of it? After watching it for the first time.
I fell in love with it. I absolutely adore this movie. It definitely fits in with my my love of the modern Japanese exploitation cinema, and that like there's it's definitely a wild concept, sort of a wandering samurai werewolf in this yokai village. But there's also this genuine sense of like sincerity to it. Did you get that from the movie? That it was like they really wanted to tell like a good story here.
Kind of. I don't think the execution works so well with it. My feeling on this, it's actually kind of similar to Bloody Chainsaw Girl in a lot of ways, although this movie definitely looks better than Bloody Chainsaw Girl did. I think
it definitely looks like it has a higher budget.
Yeah. But one of the problems I think that this movie fails in is that it doesn't quite meet the expectations set by the premise, right? You see something about werewolf samurai and you're expecting, and also that opening scene is great too.
I love it.
That opening scene is one of the best scenes in the movie. Unfortunately, I feel like the movie gets very slow after that, and it feels like they're trying to do. It feels almost like they're too focused on making a serious movie at the expense of, exploiting this high concept that they have to play with. And I thought that I was a little bit disappointed with that.
You see, I sometimes get that with these weird Japanese concepts where it's like they'll either go full on into it and completely commit to the surrealness of the story, or they'll actually take the story and kind of try to make something good out of it, like
Mm.
genuinely good out of it. I felt that's what Kibakichi was trying to go for. Like, yes, in America we would have just gone full on balls to the wall with this sort of concept, but I feel like what they were trying to do is they were actually trying to tell a story here, and I honestly I admire that. I admire that they tried to take this sort of wild idea and tried to make something sort of genuine. I sort of compare it to like it's sort of like if Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo were made by someone like an Ichiro Honda, like someone like who was
Hmm.
big in the kaiju sort of films of the 1960s and 70s. And I dug that concept. I dug that concept actually quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that the execution kind of falls flat a little bit. It feels like a case of trying to run before you can walk, right? It feels like, it with this kind of concept. I can understand the need to try to make it something more to elevate it, but I think before you're going to, it's like that old rule we have about writing. And before you can break the rules, you have to actually know what the rules are. And I feel like this director hasn't quite mastered, that kind of zany approach in order to kind of break the rules um, of that expectation, and in order to make something better out of it.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. Like he needed to understand what makes a great Japanese exploitation movie before he tries to completely go against the conventions of it.
Right. Yeah.
I get where you're coming from with that. And again, it comes back to the sort of the fact that like a movie just needs to have a basic structure, and it needs to work
Mm.
well within that structure. Just like be entertaining, engaging, or just a mixture of the two. And I felt like there were some genuine moments in this where I was like, dang, like these actors in this movie, like they really give it their all. Like
Mhm.
I feel like if you were to give like a genuine like period piece setting for this and just drop all the yokai and all that, you can make a fine movie out of this just with these actors in this setting.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the problem. It's trying to do too much. Instead of just committing to one approach or the other, it tries to combine them, and the two different components don't really quite fit together the way that I think the director intended it to. Because I compare it to something like, and talking about Machine Girl, because that's fresh in my mind, because we had just done an episode about that. Um, Machine Girl totally commits to that zany high concept aspect of it, and it just carries that through all the way. And all it does have moments where it gets a little bit slow in the middle. This felt like it really dragged in the middle.
And I can definitely see, yeah, it is much more dialogue heavy
Mm-hmm.
than you would expect. You actually mentioned a movie in your list of movies you wanted to talk about in the show, and if I'm able to come back for a future episode, I'd love to talk about it. The Origami. Uh, you mentioned that movie.
Um, I've got so many movies on that list. I have to double check. I can't. I'm not. I'm blanking on it right now.
Uh, I'll give you a chance to look it up because it's got the same sort of it's much like Kibakichi in that it you would think with a premise like Origami, I believe I'm saying that right,
Mhm.
with the whole the monster sort of samurai that's lived thousands of years. You'd expect sort of a Machine Girl, Tokyo Gore Police type of thing, but it's very dialogue heavy. It's a very dramatic film that much like Kibakichi doesn't really get to the wild stuff until like the final act.
Mhm.
Uh, that's another one. That's another one that I absolutely adore because I do like again going against the conventions. You mentioned how this movie, the director didn't really seem to understand the conventions before he broke them, but
Yeah.
I do like when at times when a movie does surprise me like that, where they're like, oh wow, this is actually like they're actually trying to add some like weight to this. And yeah, it's certainly not. I'm never going to compare this to something like what an Ozu or a Kurosawa could do,
Right.
but for what they were trying to do, for what they were trying to go for, I do appreciate it. just trying to do something different.
I don't think. I think you might be missing me out with someone else because that's definitely not one of the ones on my list.
Oh, it wasn't?
Yeah, no.
Well, then you definitely need to add that to your list because Origami is fantastic.
Okay. Yeah, I was double checking. I just looked up the movie title itself, and yeah, but it is Ryuhei Kitamura. But yeah, I never heard of this movie by him, but that's and also starring Tak Sakaguchi. So that's good. I'll have to check that out at some point, maybe.
I am awful with names. I should have mentioned that before. I am awful with names.
That's all right. But yeah, it's just that I think if you're going to do a movie like this, you really have to commit to that kind of concept. Otherwise, it just like it's not quite. I don't know. It's hard to really find a whole lot about this movie that I really liked, other than the bookend scenes. I thought were pretty well. Although some of the action choreography in the hallway fight scene, it felt like that the director would have been better served using more close-ups and quick cuts, because some of the leaping around got a little bit seemed a little bit out of place.
I felt like, going in, with the choreography didn't actually bother me that much, but I think it's just because I never went in expecting a whole lot out of it. Mm. It seemed fairly fine to me. It seemed like, because you look at choreography and a lot of the really nice big budgeted sort of period pieces, and obviously it's meant to be more lavish, more cinematic. This was just more like what I felt like, just guys, just standard guys with swords. Mm-hmm. They just flailing them around, not actual like trained samurai, but this just felt like the director was just like clang swords, make entertainment. And I was like, whatever, it filled a void. It did somewhat what it was supposed to do, so I didn't really mind that. You mentioned the bookend scenes. Is actually it's funny, when the movie started off, you mentioned that beginning scene, that opening scene was phenomenal.
Yeah,
that really set up the character beautifully, and then you have that narration, which I thought was really cool, when the light shines on the painting. Mm-hmm. And it shows the history of the yokai and humans. I was like, oh, there better be more yokai in this show. Do not disappoint me. Do not disappoint me. And then they show the kappa, and I got really excited about the kappa. And the kappa is kind of an interesting thing that I really liked about the story, because they sort of they do bookend the plot. When Kibakichi enters the village and exits the village, the kappa are there sort of as guardians, and I don't know if you really liked that, but I really liked how the kappa, even though it was brief and I really wanted more of them, I do like how they bookended it like that.
I'm glad you mentioned the kind of the opening narration, because one of the things, in addition to not really quite meeting the concept, I feel like this is a type of, I love the world building in it, and I love the idea behind this movie, and I just feel like in all these, I wanted to see more of I wanted to see a little bit more of that kind of world. And I think part of it might just be the budget and just like how limited they are, and it makes me wonder how much of this was taken from the manga, and and how much the manga explored those ideas, because that whole idea of the yokai being discriminated against by the humans and being driven away, there's a lot in there that you could use as a metaphor for stuff that actually happened in Japanese history, like the treatment of the Ainu and other indigenous peoples. And I think, and it feels like there's stuff you could do there if you've got a director who's a little bit more able to meld those different aspects of it.
Honestly, if this were a 30 episode TV show, I would binge watch this. I would totally binge watch this. But I feel like for the movie, the thing is, I would have loved more world building, but at the same time, the difficulty is the movie's only 90 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah.
It only they have to focus on one central character, and that being Kibakichi. And so it's like they had to kind of do the world building in the background while also focusing on this story with Kibakichi. Did you know there's a sequel?
Yeah, I did know there was a sequel. In fact, after I watched this, because I did see the sequel on sale as well, and I'm just like, after I watched this, I'm like, no, I'm okay.
I'm actually interested in seeing where he goes with this. I actually just looked up the director right now. I didn't realize this. He also directed Death Kappa, and he did this fantastic little early '90s cheesy flick called Mechadroid Robo Kill Beneath Disco Club Layla. You ever heard of that one?
No, I've never heard of that one.
That one's nuts. He's definitely, I think, his sort of visual style. Are you familiar with? I'm boy, am I going to butcher this name? Kaite Amamiya.
I don't think so. What are some of the films he's directed?
He did actually two fantastic Kamen Rider specials back in the '90s. Kamen Rider Zeo and Kamen Rider J. He also did. Well, he's the creator of course I'd forget the name right now. I have the brain of a 70-year-old man. I'm only 26. So this is going good. Give me like 5 seconds, because this is going to bother me for the entire. Oh, Zerum. That's what it was. He created like the entirety of Zerum, which was like 2 movies, and it was an anime and a manga.
Oh, okay. It sounds familiar, but I've never seen it.
But yeah, he definitely has. What I really like about this director is that he does have, much like Kaite Amamiya, he's very much centered on like special effects, and if nothing else, that is one thing he does very well. Is his special effects work.
Apparently, too, yeah. Tomo Haraguchi, the director, he apparently came from. He was apparently a makeup effects artist, and that's kind of his background in this. And he had done another movie before this, Sakuya, the Slayer of Demons, and that one, just going by the reviews on Letterboxd, seems to have been a lot more well received than this one was.
I am definitely interested in that. I mean, again, it definitely looks like his type of movie. It looks like very special effects heavy, and also, again, much like Kibakichi, period piece type. I'm interested in checking that one out. I'll have to get back with you on how that one is.
Yeah. One of the, and I think, going to what you said about the world building and how they only had 90 minutes, I think that's kind of comes back to something I had said earlier, is that I think this movie is trying to do a little bit too much. It tries to set up this whole world but at the same time, and it's trying to do this, and it's trying to play with these themes of discrimination, while at the same time wrapping it up in this werewolf exploitation horror film. And it tries to do all of this in the span of 90 minutes. And I don't think it has enough time to really let any of those different ideas kind of breathe.
Yeah, and this is sort of a funny kind of conversation we're having, because it's like I can't disagree with this, but at the same time, it's again, I just sort of watching this and sort of turning my brain off. I've now seen this movie twice. I saw it shortly after I bought it, and I watched it yesterday in preparation, and I don't know, for what it gave me, I was endlessly charmed by it. I never really found it boring. What really sort of kept the dramatic, more dialogue-heavy moments strong were the performances. The actors in this were excellent, and there was a lot of good. I thought it was the dialogue was really well written. I actually wrote down a quote. There's this great scene where the head of the yokai, was it Ozion? Is that how you?
I'm blanking on the name, but yeah. Anyway, I'll double check it, and while you're Onizo.
Onizo. When Kibakichi and Onizo
or Ozino, or I've seen it written 2 different ways in this Wikipedia right up here. So
let's call him Big O. We're Big O and Kibakichi are talking about, Kibakichi's like, is this right, to be, just attacking humans, and Big O, because there's the yokai that's a dice roller, and the dice are a part of her, and she's sitting there fiddling with her dice, and he goes, life is like a spot on a die, we won't know until we shake it. And I'm like, oh, that's good. I don't know why. Again, I'm very easily entertained. I thought, wow, that's a really well written little line. It had a little bit of a sting to it.
I think both because I've only seen this movie twice. I saw it way back when I first got it, and I saw it last night to prepare for this. And I think in both times, I probably wasn't in the the right frame of mind to kind of appreciate it in the same way you are. And I think, and there are different reasons for that. The first time, it's because I was expecting, something that was a lot more, that lived up to this concept a little bit more, something a little bit more grindhouse, something that played up more of the action and that. And then when I saw it yesterday, I had just come back from seeing the Batman, so that's where it's like the complete opposite, where it's a 3-hour movie that never feels slow and never drags, whereas this is a 90-minute movie that completely drags in the middle. So it's just like a complete inversion of what I'd seen earlier that day.
What's funny is you mentioned not being in the right frame of mind. I've technically seen this movie 2.5 times, because I like right after I got it in the mail, I popped it in and I saw the opening scene. I was like, all right, yeah, we're moving along here. And then when it got to the more dramatic bits, I was like, I am not feeling this right now. Mm-hmm. And so I turned it off, came back to it at a later date when I was more prepared, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, there's some merit to be had here. So yeah, maybe it does sort of come down to, like, you have to be more prepared for what you're getting involved with. Again, it goes back to Origami. It just, you kind of take a gamble with these types of movies. They don't obviously explain on the back of the box, oh, by the way, this is much more dialogue heavy than what you're expecting.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's also another, and that's not necessarily a fault of the director, but it's probably a fault of the US distributors of this movie, because the box art and all of that stuff, it really played up the fact that, oh, it's a werewolf samurai movie, and it is, but it's not the way you'd expect it to be. And I think that's kind of I think they're counting on people just kind of buying the movie sight unseen, as opposed to being just based on that concept more than anything else.
What was it like? Because you live in Japan, and you rented this movie in Japan?
No. I purchased this movie, long back when I still lived in the States. I purchased this at a Blockbuster, one of their used DVD sales.
Oh, okay. Because I was wondering, like, how does it, how do DVDs portray this thing in Japan?
I'm not sure. I've actually never seen this in any of the DVD. I've never had to look for it either, but that's something I might have to look up to see how it's portrayed in Japan. But yeah, it definitely, the US version of it, at least, made it seem like it was something a lot more grindhousey, a lot more exploitative, because this was also this is the early 2000s when this movie came out, when it was released. And in a lot of these back in that time, in the early 2000s in America, there was a huge rush of DVD distributors buying up and releasing Asian films in the States. And they were buying up mostly like exploitation type stuff and grindhouse type stuff, horror and that kind of thing. Anything that could kind of capitalize on the popularity of J-horror or battle royale, even though it didn't have a US distributor at the time, it was still very popular. And anything that could kind of capitalize on those two things got a US release. And invariably, they had always kind of played up the exploitation aspects of these movies.
Oh, I own at least a couple hundred of those types of movies. I was actually just looking up like 2 or 3 really popular companies that were distributing these movies in mass were Tokyo Shock, Asia Pulp Cinema, and the Tartan Asian Extreme.
Yes, yeah. I definitely had some of those.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned you actually did an episode on was it Kamikaze Girls?
Yes, yeah.
And you mentioned in that, you said that it's kind of funny how this really has nothing to do with kamikaze pilots, but because in America we understand what the word kamikaze is, and despite its really dark meaning, it pops on on a DVD case. So that's why they probably obviously called it that. So yeah, there's all types of stuff like that here in the US. So I really would not be shocked if that was the case.
Well, yeah. Well, looking at the DVD cover in Japan, it definitely looks a lot different from what you'd expect. It's almost like a manga inspired cover, and it's much more of this. It just shows the character kind of like in in shadow in a way. Let me bring it up and I can show you here on the screen in a minute here on Amazon Japan. But this is, this is kind of shows like what they were trying to, the difference in interpretations of it. So here's what it looks like on Amazon Japan. You can see it's a much different kind of expectation based on that cover.
Oh wow, that is gorgeous.
Mhm.
I really love that.
Yeah.
I would actually prefer that over the cover that we got, because I would imagine you have the do you own this on DVD?
I own it on DVD. Yeah, I've got the US version of it.
Okay, so then you have the exact same version I do, where it shows like a skeleton and the Spider Woman, and obviously right in the middle is Kibakichi in his werewolf form.
Yeah.
And the back it has him transform into a werewolf. Yeah, so they definitely want to make it more exploitative for the American release. That's funny.
Yeah, and I think, but I will say this about the movie is that it looks a lot better than it has any reason to, despite the low budget. And because you think about, I do compare this to Bloody Chainsaw Girl in that way. In that Bloody Chainsaw Girl, it's like they just found an abandoned high school in the area and just set up a camera in there. Whereas this one, there's a lot more attention paid to how it's shot and how it looks, and trying to really make it feel like it's shot in the right period.
What's funny is I've noticed that with a lot of the modern Japanese B movies versus the American ones. My exposure to American B movies for the most part is Asylum. I'm sure you're familiar with Asylum. And stuff like that, where they do very low budget features, but man, are they low budget. Like you can really painfully tell. Whereas in Japan, again, I go back to a lot of those splatterpunk directors. It's kind of amazing what they are able to accomplish on such low budgets, especially with practical special effects. Practical special effects nowadays are not cheap.
Yeah.
But like you look in this movie, you look at like again like the yokai makeup, or that finale scene where Kibakichi is a werewolf, and the I don't know what the yokai is called, but the giant one-eyed ogre face off, and I was like, wow, those costumes are really good. Like they obviously look bulky, and they definitely by their movements you can tell that they are very bulky, kind of cumbersome costumes, but they're still very well made.
Yeah. And despite that, the movie looks good, and I think it like I said, it's got some good performances in it. But it's the entire time you're watching it, you've been set up by that opening scene, and the entire time they're going through all this, the politics of dealing with the human yakuza and all that, and the entire time you're just sitting there thinking like, man, when are we gonna get another werewolf samurai scene?
Well, then the ending hits, and you're like, wow, like that was clearly where quite a bit of the budget went.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. You get to that ending scene, and you're just kind of like, why couldn't the rest of the movie been just like this?
What's sad is that's a lot. Like, obviously, when you watch a lot of B movies like I do, it's sort of like playing Russian roulette. Like, sometimes you get stuff like the Brian Yuzna, Stuart Gordon classics of the time, and then you'll get stuff where you get set up by an amazing cover and the potential for these really gory monster scenes, and then you can clearly tell for 3/4 of it they didn't have the budget, so it's mostly just dragging out until the last like 10 minutes where it all hits. Where they put the majority of the budget. Another interesting thing is that going back to sort of American modern exploitation, I'm sure you've seen like quite a lot of the Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez movies, right?
Oh yeah.
You know how when they did like Grindhouse, how it it was very sort of like dipped in sepia tone and looked very rough, like a 1970s movie, but very exaggerated.
Yeah,
I sort of got that vibe a little bit with this movie. Like there was a little bit of a sepia tone color to it, and it felt very much like it was trying to go for sort of an American 70s grindhouse feature. I doubt that's what they were going for, but I just very much got that vibe while watching it.
No, I did too, and I think that was there. I think there had to have been some intentionality behind that, because I mean, this is early 2000s, so it was no doubt probably shot on digital. So it could have looked. It didn't have to have that grindhouse effect unless they wanted it to have that effect. So I think there's definitely some truth to that. Comparing it to grindhouse, it's funny you mentioned that because I was thinking of grindhouse as well, but in a different way. What I was thinking about in comparison to grindhouse was how you had the two different movies in that you had Planet Terror and you had Death Proof, whereas Planet Terror completely committed to the premise that it promised. Whereas Death Proof was a lot longer and more meandering than it really had to be. And I think that this movie definitely feels like I wanted it to be Planet Terror, but it felt more like Death Proof.
I could definitely see that. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Robert Rodriguez has, for the most part, never made a better movie than anything Quentin Tarantino ever made. But in that one instance, he actually did. Yeah, Planet Terror is a far better movie than Death Proof, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, it is far more meandering. But again, I think it would be interesting to see, like how we would have initially reacted to it if, sort of the wild concept were toned down
Right.
a bit more in the promotion for this movie.
Yeah.
How it would have gone.
Yeah, and like you were saying, like if this were a TV show, I think it would have been a lot more interesting. They would have had a lot more room to kind of play with the concept. And
absolutely.
And I think that that's one of the downsides of it, because the premise behind the world is a really cool idea, and there's a lot of stuff you can do with that. There's a lot of exploration, but the movie just doesn't quite. There's not enough time. There's not enough budget, and I don't really think they really know how to really kind of to do that within this time frame that they have.
And it's again, it goes back to I really can't fault you for thinking that. It's sort of one of those things where it's like you're either going to go into this movie wanting something like a I don't know, we go back to Bloody Chainsaw Girl. It's like a broken record. Go back to Bloody Chainsaw Girl, but you either expect something where it's like really on the extreme grindhouse sort of spectrum, or you go into it expecting what you're going to get, which is much more of a dramatic piece.
Right.
And I think that if going into it with that sort of feeling, I think that it would make it a better movie. But I completely understand what you're thinking of, where being tremendously let down by it.
Yeah.
There was, however, something else I wanted to bring up about the movie that I really loved in terms of its aesthetics. I really loved the sort of again, I talked about the sepia tone colors, but I also really loved how they would do like very bright greens and reds in it. That sort of like reminded me of those like 50s, 60s sort of Japanese monster movies like Kwaidan, or those yokai movies, the yokai monster movies,
Right.
where they would use a lot of like very like bright colors. I felt that definitely seemed like an homage to those types of flicks. And I especially love the scene where they with the eye patch guy that gets it the worst of anybody at that point. It was very it's sort of funny. We get these scenes again, very dramatized scenes, and then we get this scene where they're feasting on his head, and they're cutting up his hand and eating raw meat. Sort of the weird. I can definitely see why you would have been turned off by there's definitely like drastic tonal shifts that sort of give you massive whiplash. Again, going back to the finale definitely feels like was it Noboru Iguchi, the guy that did Machine Girl?
It
definitely felt like that with a Noboru Iguchi type scene, whereas the rest of it was definitely like a more like we're really, really trying to go for something serious here, like an Ozu type thing.
It makes me curious of what the manga was like. And because like I said, they apparently just took the name. I mean, this Wikipedia summary where it mentioned that was really poorly written, so I'm not even sure if that's correct.
I never even knew there was a manga. That's news to
I
me.
mean, like I said, that's apparently there was a manga that was based on, very loosely based, or like they just took the title of it or something like that. But I'm not finding a whole lot on the search, so I'm not really sure about that even.
And honestly, like I've seen so many. Oh yeah, I am actually. Yeah, there was a. It almost looks like it was done by Go Nagai. Like it has a very Nagai type feel to it. But yeah, if does end up being different than the manga, you know, being different, I don't think is anything bad. In fact, I actually prefer, you know, if you're not going to do like a straightforward sort of adaptation of something, doing your own thing is definitely like a really really fun thing to see, like how directors take their own vision of something and put it into an adaptation.
Oh yeah, I've got no problem with that. I'm just curious what the manga was like, and because they'd apparently only taken the title and the concept, so I am curious what the manga had in it, and how, whether or not the concept was even the same or not, or what about it, because it seems it's something that seems like it'd be really interesting if it had the room to breathe. In a manga, you definitely would have the room to breathe in that, and you also wouldn't be you know, beholden to effects budgets or anything like that either. So, and I think like this kind of concept would definitely work very well in a comic book format.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But it's another thing that I love about Japanese exploitation, that they're, you know, that you get these directors who have these small budgets, but they have very big imaginations, and they're just willing to commit wholeheartedly, you know, to going through with these visions of theirs.
Yeah.
Now, see, that's why I've been watching these types of movies for so long. It's just like, you know, like to take a concept like this and be like, all right, we have this very small budget, but you know what? Screw it. We're gonna make this movie, and we're gonna do the best that we can. You know, it's very admirable. You don't see something like that in American cinema very often.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Okay, is there anything else you wanted to say about this movie? I think I've pretty much said everything there is I have to say about it.
Let me look through my notes. I didn't have many. It's funny. I didn't have. I was hoping to get a lot of notes out of this, but I didn't have too many notes. I did really like, one of the things I did really like, it would take a movie like this with sort of to sort of slow down a bit in order to really flesh this out. I really loved how the yokai set up this gambling house, and the yokai lady with the dice, she leads these men on to thinking that they have this great luck and they keep winning, and then eventually they start losing. And I've seen this in gambling addicts where they're like, they win so much and then they start losing, and then they're like, well, I have to get this money back now, so they have to bet more, and then eventually by the end they're broke.
Yeah.
And I really like that that's how they steal their money, and then they take them to these back rooms and they tantalize them with, you know, these women and all that, and all these prospects, and then eventually they just get eaten. I really really dug how they went about that.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like there's so many good little good elements here like that, and it's just they don't quite connect to me as much as I want them to.
Yeah, I totally get your feeling about that. But yeah, I just wanted to touch upon that because that was another thing I really really liked about it. Aside from the, like, man, that ending though, I think that actor, you know, was preparing his whole life for that. The moment where the main guy, where he just starts screaming at the top of his lungs and takes these grenades and just starts chucking grenades at the guy. That was so good.
Although it is interesting about the main actor, is because, you know, my wife was kind of in and out of the room when I was watching this, and she did recognize the main actor, Yuji Harada, because apparently he is apparently he had gotten involved in a sex scandal like a year or two ago.
Oh no.
Yeah, apparently like having like caught having car sex or something like that.
What was his name?
Yuji Harada. He was also in Izo.
I was trying to see if I've seen anything else with him. I actually have not. This is the only thing I've seen with him in it.
Okay. Yeah, Izo. He was in Izo. That was a Takashi Miike film. That was pretty good. But yeah, that was the thing that was probably the most interesting thing I found out about this was that he had had sex scandal apparently.
Oh, one of the actors in this, well, actually, a couple of actors that were in this were in a series of films called Ninja Vixens. Are you familiar with those?
No, I've never heard of those.
I've vaguely heard of them. There's like 20 of them.
Mhm.
That was again why I've been doing research for my book. I've compiled this ungodly list of like hundreds of weird Asian flicks. I think the Ninja Vixen movies are on my list. I'll have to hunt those down and see if I can send you video links to those. Maybe
Okay.
we'll talk about them on the show at some point.
Yeah, maybe. All right. So is there anything you'd like to promote before we close up?
I'd love to promote my book, but the problem is again, it's sort of in the beginning stages. But
Right.
if you want to, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm under morally reprehensible schlock. That's morally underscore reprehensible underscore schlock. You can follow me on Letterboxd. I'm the Giant Claw. If you're watching this, I believe you have my profile picture on the video. If you're recording this for YouTube, that's you can just find me on my Instagram under that profile picture, and that's about it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Tyler. And yeah, that does it for this episode of Japan on Film. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. JapanOnFilm.com is the website. Please make sure to like and review us on Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you're on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for watching this episode of Japan on Film. For more of our videos, just hit the subscribe button.